Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to the George Washington University Museum and the Textile Museum. After more than 60 years in the fashion industry, Audrey Smaltz has created a niche that secures her place as one of fashion's most innovative entrepreneurs. Accepted into New York City's High School of Music and the Performing Arts, Audrey took her first professional modeling job from baseball's New York Giants, working in the program there. After graduating from high school, Audrey worked as a model and fashion commentator. As an art major at City College, Audrey also worked for Metropolitan Life Insurance and the Reuben Donnelly Corporation. In 1962, Audrey worked as a model and salesperson at Bloomingdale's and became an assistant fashion coordinator for the store in 1964. She was hired by Lane Bryant in 1965 and worked as a buyer and model and also as a fashion coordinator. Moving to Chicago in 1969, Audrey joined Ebony Fashion Fair in 1970 as a commentator and fashion editor. As Ebony magazine's fashion reporter, she was often assigned to back seats or no seats at all at the European fashion shows. Undaunted, she went backstage to inspect clothes, and seeing the chaos behind the scenes, she recognized an immediate need in the fashion industry, satisfying a need that needs to be taken care of. In 1977, she started Ground Crew, a backstage management team that handles every detail of backstage operations. The name Ground Crew was inspired by Dr. Martin Luther King Jr.'s words from his 1964 Nobel Prize speech. Quote, "Every time I take a flight, I'm always reminded of the people who make the journey successful. The known pilots and the unknown ground crew. You honor the ground crew without whose labor and sacrifices the jet flights to freedom could have never left the earth." Over the years, Ground Crew has staffed many fashion shows, including those by Vera Wang, Giorgio Armani, Betsy Johnson, Oscar de la Renta, Bill Blass, Stephen Burrows, Kenneth Cole, Donna Karan. Audrey has also worked with corporations like Nike, Vogue, Saks, Fifth Avenue, BET, Macy's, and J. Crew. And with that, I'd like to invite Audrey to the front. Thank you, Martin. What would we do without Martin? We have to give Martin a big hand. So I guess the slides are just going to go on a loop, and they're arranged chronologically, starting with Audrey's beginning tenure in 1970 with the Ebony Fashion Fair. So I just wanted to ask you just a little bit about your interest in modeling and getting started in the industry just a little bit prior to you joining Fashion Fair.
Believe it or not, I was 6 feet tall. I like to say 72 long when I was about 15 or 16 years old at 135 pounds. And that's how I got interested in modeling, because everyone said, "Oh, you should be a model. Oh, you should be a model." And it started out that way. And my very first job was with the New York Giants, but it was Willie Mays Day, August the 7th, 1954.
That's your birthday time.
Yeah, and it was, I was a say hey kid for Willie Mays. And I tell everybody that was my first job because I got paid. You know, there are a lot of jobs you can get and not get paid. So that was the first job, a say hey kid for Willie Mays, because he would say hey. He didn't say hello, he said, say hey. Oh. I wonder if he still says say hey, he probably does.
So what took you to Chicago?
Well, I got married, and I married a physician there named Dr. Stanley Hughes, and I knew a lot of friends in Chicago through Stanley, and I knew the Johnsons were there, and our marriage wasn't working out too well, and I knew I needed a job because the marriage wasn't, I wanted to. So I spoke to a young lady named LaDoris Foster, who was John Johnson's secretary. And she was a good friend, and she told me, I can get you an appointment with Eunice Johnson. I said, good, because I need to meet the Johnsons. I'm going to need a job. And I met with the Johnsons because you know somebody. That's very important, to know somebody so you can get to meet the right person. And I met the Johnsons one summer afternoon in 1970. Wow, 1970. Wow. It's a long time ago. That's 47 years ago. And some of you are not even 47 years old in this building. They interviewed me, and they hired me right on the spot. Right on the spot, I was hired. And I told them I couldn't go to Europe. They were going to take me to Europe that same July. And I told them I couldn't go to Europe because I was getting a divorce. But anyway, I started with Ebony magazine on August the 13th, 1970. And it was a Wednesday. And by Friday, Mr. Johnson calls me into his office, and he says, I'm sending you to Detroit. You have to pick out some models. I said, Saturday, that's the day I have to get my hair done, my nails done. Oh, no, not this Saturday. You're going to Detroit. And I said, wow, my goodness. So I was in his office, and he had a stack of books by Maya Angelou, and it said, I Know Why a Caged Bird Sings. And I said, you give me one of those books, and I'll go to Detroit. And I've been on the road ever since.
So you were brought on to work the fashion fair, or brought on to work as editor, fashion editor for the magazine, Ebony magazine?
No, I was brought on just to be the commentator for the Ebony Fashion Fair. I made myself the coordinator, the commentator, and Eunice just wanted me to be the commentator. But I told her I was the coordinator because I had to get all those clothes together. She wanted to take all the credit. I wouldn't allow that. I was working backstage. It was the best job any young woman could possibly have, really. And we loved coming to Washington, D.C. Oh, I'm just looking at that. Can you imagine? We were invited to the White House by Robert Brown, was a special assistant to President Nixon. And Mr. Fentress, who organized the trip for us, he said, ladies, on Monday, that's our one day off, because we worked 6 days a week. We had Mondays off. We're going to the White House. And that was a big deal. And we went into the Oval Office. That's when you know somebody that knows some. It's important. Mr. Robert Brown took us to the White House. But my other fabulous memory for my very first year with the Ebony Fashion Fair was here. We stayed at the Shoreham Hotel. It's still there, right? And we liked staying at the Shoreham because not only did we work at the Shoreham, we lived at the Shoreham. That didn't always happen, because some of the little towns we stayed at the Howard Johnson. That was big, or Holiday Inn. But we were at a real hotel with an elevator. And the show was in the big ballroom. About 2,000 people. It was a Sunday show, by the way. So we worked Sunday, 4 o'clock, had a little cocktail party in between, and then the 8 o'clock show. And little did we know that it was the 36th show that year, because we would start out in Rockford, Illinois, Kankakee, Illinois, towns you'd never heard of. And then by the 36th show, we get to Washington, D.C., and the very next day, on a Monday, in the Washington Post, Sally Quinn, I know you know that name, Mrs. Ben Bradley now. She was just Sally Quinn then, brand new job, wrote all about the Ebony Fashion Fair. It just blew her away, and it showed in what she wrote about in that story. She said the show was loved by men and women, and the clothes and the music. And then she said, and that commentator, she had a voice like Eartha Kitt. So that was the first time I made the Washington Post.
Yeah, there's an image of you there.
Now this is different now. So we started out at the Shoreham, but in 1976, we went to the Kennedy Center. Now, I don't know the capacity of the Kennedy Center.
Well, it was 2,700, and you booked 2 shows.
2 shows sold out. And I was told by a good friend of mine that was the first time they ever had a fashion show at the Kennedy Center. So, period. Thank you. And that's me and Mrs. Johnson sitting on her sofa in her fabulous office. Wow, what an office.
So tell us about your travels with Mrs. Johnson to Europe.
Well, that was fun. I traveled with Mrs. Johnson starting in 1971. We just went for couture. That's made to order. And we'd go in July, and we'd start off in Rome, and from Rome we went to Paris, and we would be with all the designers. But when I started working, that I was in charge of the luggage. I had to be in charge of everything because we were traveling. And when I first traveled with her, her passport said she was born in 1916. And then the next season, I went to Europe with her, her passport said 1926. But we got to meet all of the top designers. And what she did, which was so unique, and they never could figure it out, we would tell them we were Ebony Magazine. Well, magazine is a store. We said, no, magazine, then you have to say journal. And we would buy clothes. Mrs. Johnson bought every piece that was in the show, 200 garments, totally accessorized. Can you imagine that, Bill? You don't want to know. But I'm going to tell you about one designer, Valentino. You all know Valentino. You must have something Valentino. And his last name, Garavani. But anyway, she loved Valentino in Rome on Via Gregoriana, a beautiful showroom, just magnificent. And after the show, we'd go back and buy the garments. And that particular year, 1972 it was, I wrote a check for $50,000. I'm making $250 a week now. I wrote that check. I used to write all these checks for various designers, and she would sign them. And we never had to worry about how much was in the bank. It was there. So they never could really understand, and it was not easy to tell these designers we just wanted one piece. And Mrs. Johnson only wanted special pieces, and she said to me, Audrey, the garment has to look good coming and going, you know, because you went down the runway and then you came back up the runway. So she always, so that's important. So ladies, that's a good thing for you to know that, how do you look in the back? Coming and going, how do you look? That's very important. Mrs. Johnson pointed that out to me right away.
So,
but we love
memories of Washington, D.C., but there are also photos of you from other cities.
Oh, yes,
and
we
Los
went to a lot of
Angeles.
cities. Camille, yes, ladies, we went to a lot of cities. But, and for those of you who don't know, on a Greyhound bus. We were not flying first class. We were on a Greyhound bus. I was on the right side of the bus, the 8th seat down, and I was lucky because I was the commentator. I had my own seat. Girls who were, the ladies who modeled, they had to share a seat with their roommate. Oof. But you know what wasn't fair? The male models had their own seat. Did you notice that? They gave the men their own seat, but all the female models had to share. And we traveled to every city you could think of, even Itabena, Mississippi. Oh, you know about Itabena. You from Itabena? I never heard of Itabena. Oh, that's right. It's a wonderful college there. That's where we worked. Yeah, that's where we worked. That's right there. So we worked in Detroit and in Washington. What was so fabulous, the ladies here in Washington, the Continental Society. Now, these were the real society ladies of D.C., and I'm sure they called the Washington Post and they sent somebody over, because we didn't do that. We didn't call local stations. The various charities that we worked for did that. And one of my good friends was a Continental. And when I got here, and she was so happy to see me. Her name was Marguerite Mazik. How many of you remember Dr. Mazik? Oh, good. But before Marguerite was Marguerite Mazik, do you know her first name? Belafonte. Oh, good, I got some memories. Marguerite was married to Harry Belafonte, and then they divorced, and she came to Washington, and she was married to Dr. Edward Mazik. Wow, those are good memories. And she was a member of the Continentals, but the Continentals had some fantastic women who worked very hard and raised lots of money.
Yeah, and the
and gave lots of money to so many charities here in D.C. And Eunice and John Johnson made that happen. $51 million in all for all of the cities from 1958 to 2009. I know you don't remember to 1958. How many of you remember 1958? I do. Okay, good. Thank you. A couple of hands went up. And you know what's so wonderful? We have an organization of all of us still together, not just models, bus drivers, stage managers, business managers, wardrobe. That's very important. Now, the ladies who took care of our wardrobe and they dressed us, and it's a family affair. Mm-hmm. We were very privileged to meet the top people in every city. We met Dr. So-and-so, lawyer, this, and then famous people as well. They would all come to the Ebony Fashion Fair. And in Washington, D.C., coming to the fashion fair in Washington, D.C. was the Black Caucus. So there was Andrew Young from Georgia, and Ron Dellums from California, and Louis Stokes from Ohio, and their wives. I think their wives brought them, and they came. Well, they wanted to see those pretty models walk that runway. William Clay from Missouri. Yes. Oh, just wonderful. Oh, and from Detroit, Michigan. John Conyers, yeah, John Conyers, yes. So they all came to see us here in Washington. You name it, whoever was in Washington, and we had that same kind of audience, and they got dressed. You know, today I often wonder, where has elegance gone? Elegance went somewhere. When we did the Ebony Fashion Fair, the audience tried to outdress the Ebony Fashion Fair. They got dressed to the nines, and every story that a writer or journalist would write in their columns, they would say, well, the audience had on, and they always interviewed one or two or three people from the audience because they were dressed down, as we would say, dressed down. I remember one year a man had on a pink satin suit, dressed down, honey. It was incredible how the Johnsons influenced how the world looked. And they would know the various designers. They had never heard of these designers. I remember one man said to me, oh, I thought it was Givenchy, Audrey. No, darling, it's Hubert de Givenchy. But they got to know the names of designers, and think about it, it's 1970 to 1977. Nobody knew those names then. Those names are well known now, 2017. But Eunice brought those names to the Black community. And when the white community started figuring this out, they said, Audrey, can we come to the show? I used to have more freebies coming into the show who were my white friends. They heard so much about this show. And we would have people from Vogue magazine, all the Bazaar magazines from all the stores. And one year we were somewhere south, and I said to the audience, well, if I tell you his first name, will you tell me his last? And I said, Bill. And Bill's people were working there, and Bill is white, of course, and his people who were working for him were white. They came back to Bill Blass. They said, you have to go to this show. Black folk know who you are. We had more people coming. They couldn't believe, you know. Yeah. And we used all of the top names, Giorgio di San Angelo, Oscar de la Renta. Oh, yeah. Just
I wanted to ask you, and I have, it's going through the slides, but the recruitment of models.
Oh, yes.
Did you have auditions here in Washington, D.C., or did prospective models fly into Chicago where you interviewed men and women for the job each year?
Yes, you would come into Chicago, but if you knew somebody in D.C. and they wrote to Mrs. Johnson or Mr. Johnson or made a phone call, you had to be 5'7" if you were a female, 5'10" if you were a male, and you had to be a certain weight, etc. And if they liked you, you sent your photograph and your measurements, and if you were lucky, you would get a call to go to Chicago, and they would send your plane ticket. They would, if they liked you, that's how you got started, right? They sent your plane ticket, darling. Yes, indeed. Well, in New York, a lot of people came in to see me to see if they could get to go to the Ebony Fashion Fair. So it didn't matter where you lived, because we had girls from Slidell, Louisiana. We had them from all over. Oh, Carolyn Carrier, I wonder how she is. Yeah, we had from all over. So you just had to send in your photograph. Oh, and they wanted to see a photograph in a swimsuit.
Interesting.
Yes, because you had to wear a swimsuit. And then they would bring the girls, young ladies in, and the men, also men, in Chicago. And there were about 5 of us, the Johnsons, of course, and Ginny Tibbs, Miss Fentress, myself, and maybe someone else. Oh, Linda Johnson as she got older. And they would select the models. And so we were 10 female models. I think I started out with 9 female. Well, we got to 10 female models and 2 male models, 4 wardrobe, business manager, and stage manager, and the bus driver. We were 20 on the bus, I believe, right? About 20 of us, yeah.
The young people asked me, and we had a press preview when the show opened, and I was surprised by the number of press people, but most of them were under 40 years of age. And they were trying to wrap their minds around the fact that models couldn't go out to eat in certain towns in the South and weren't able to stay at the nicer hotels. Could you share some of those stories for the younger folks here?
Well, I can tell you that by 1970, that did not happen to us. But in 1958, when the show started, we only went to 6 cities. And we had young ladies in the show. There are 2 young ladies particularly, not so young anymore, but it's okay, we still say young. Carol Preston Brantley and Elaine McNeil Calloway. Those 2 young ladies, they were called high yalla. They were so high yalla, they looked white. And many cities where we were in the South, they would have to get off the bus and order the food for the entire bus because we weren't going to sit in the back. We didn't go around the back. So those girls went in the front and ordered all the food in a white establishment, and that's how that went down. But by night, I probably 58, 59, 60, and then it kind of eased. But what we would do, we would stay at various homes. If we couldn't stay in a hotel in a particular city, well, we stayed with the doctors, the lawyers, and the undertakers. You know, they had, the undertaker had a fabulous home. No recession and undertaking, honey.
No.
I stayed with a couple of undertakers in there. So the community would house the Ebony Fashion Fair. The community would house, but after a while, you know, many cities were open, but when the cities were not open, we would stay with the top of the line community, which was fun. Good food, too.
Mm-hmm. So I've been a business owner myself for 15 years. What did you glean from Ebony Fashion Fair to start your own business in 1977?
Wow. Working for John Johnson, a genius. I just watched him and how he made decisions. And I said, you know, when I turn a certain age, 40, I'm going into business for myself. He was sure of himself. He took risks. And he was so bright without a college degree, you know. He had what you call common sense. And just because not everybody has common sense, because sense is not common, right? Sense is not common. He knew to select, and I just watched him, and I said, one day, I'm going to go out on my own. And I did. I told him one July 1977, I went to his office. I said, Mr. Johnson, I'm leaving the Ebony Fashion Fair. No, you're not. Or, yes, I am. He said, you're not going to go work for the white man, are you? I said, no, Mr. Johnson, I'm not working for the white man. I'm going to start my own business because of you. You have inspired me to start my own business. So we were on our way to Europe. And so he said, well, Audrey, if you want to get along with Mrs. Johnson, don't tell her you're leaving. And he said, you've done such a good job. You can stay a whole week in Europe on me. Whoa. I had all the cards. I had an American Express card. I had the green International Air Travel card. I only traveled first class. Except when I was on the Greyhound bus. But that was first class. Anyway. And I just went on my own, and he told me, he said, Audrey, I will be your first client. Wow. So I had the respect for him. He had the respect for me. He wasn't my first client, but he became my client. And the way he became my client, a friend, when you know somebody, right? When you know somebody, a gentleman who was Anne Klein's husband, yes, he came over to me and he said, Audrey, what are you doing now? I said, oh, I have my own little business. He said, you know, you need to work for Revlon. And sure enough, I went out to do a job for Revlon, a little fashion show at a store. And it got back to Mr. Johnson that I was doing this fashion show at a store. And he called me up. He said, Audrey, are you working for the white man? I said, no, I'm working for the green dollar. And he said, I'm coming to New York City, and I had a beautiful contract with John Johnson and Fashion Fair Cosmetics, because by that time we had Fashion Fair Cosmetics. And I had to tell you about the cosmetic company, because when we started with the Ebony Fashion Fair, we had Posner. How many of you remember Posner? Ooh. Flory Roberts. Ooh. We had a lot of various cosmetic, and I said to Mr. Johnson, you need to start your own cosmetic company. So Mrs. Johnson said, oh, yes, you know, she wanted to be Estee Lauder, too. Mm-hmm. So, Estee Lauder, you know. Anyway, we started the Ebony Fashion Fair Cosmetic Company, I believe in 1972 or 73. Mm-hmm. By 1973, we had, and I started in 70, and I said, you know, we should have our own cosmetics. And the next thing I know, we have our own cosmetics. Excellent cosmetics. I don't know whether they're still around.
Yeah, they're still around.
Oh, good. I'm glad to hear that. So that's how the cosmetic company came, and it made sense. It really made sense. The man was brilliant, and raised more than $50 million for charities all over the United States. Isn't that amazing? A fashion show.
Mm-hmm. The longest running fashion show in the history. Yeah.
As Camille just said, the longest running, 51 years running a fashion show. You know, amazing. But those clothes were amazing. The models were amazing. The music, Dave Rivera could play the piano. Oh, he was so fabulous to hear that good music. I remember one of our shows, it was the show, 1971. The name of that show was What's Going On? And Mrs. Johnson always came up with every title for our show. I said, well, Mrs. Johnson, I just came up with that title. Honey, that was the same year Marvin Gaye. Well, you know you have to that's your boss. Yes, Mrs. Johnson. And people would say, well, Audrey, what's Mrs. Johnson's first name? You'd ask me that.
What's Mrs. Johnson's name?
First name.
What's Mrs. Johnson's first name?
Mrs. Oh, it was a fabulous 7 years of anyone's life. And the people that we met, I mean, they're not doing so good now, but they were at the top of their game back in the day. They would come to the shows to see the show. Shall I tell the names? Oh yeah, I know you want to hear the name. Juice. OJ. OJ would come to the. Oh, anyway, it's okay. It's just the back. The back is. It's okay. OJ. Juice would come to the show, and. Sammy Davis, oh right, Sammy Davis Jr. I'll never forget, huh? Oh, Bill Cosby, and his good friend was Sidney Poitier. That was a good show. Oh, you know who always came to our show? None other than the champ himself, Muhammad Ali.
Yes.
But he came to our show when he was Cassius Clay. So I have his autograph, and I said, put both names down there. I still have it. Cassius Clay, now Muhammad Ali. So he changed. In 1969, he was Cassius Clay. By 1970, he said, Audrey, I'm Muhammad Ali now. So all the top people came to our show to see us. I mean, we were an institution. You had
An empire.
That's right, Mr. Johnson's empire. Thank you for saying that.
Before we ask questions of the audience members with your cards, you're writing questions out for Audrey. Can you share with us your fondest memory? Your fondest memory of Fashion Fair.
Wow, my fondest. There's so many. That's delicious. Huh?
I know there are probably several. I get
Wow.
asked this question regularly.
Yeah, look, I have to think on my that's a good question. My fondest memory. I can't even think of my fondest memory. I guess, it happened here in Washington, D.C. It's 1970, the first year, and I used to stand behind a lectern and do the Ebony Fashion Fair. I used just to stand there and talk, because I never used cards. Never. Now, not that I didn't rehearse, but you never saw me rehearse. And we get to Washington, D.C., and I say to Willie D., our manager, he's so mad at me. Willie D., we're here in D.C., we're at the Shoreham Hotel. I saw how it was set up. I want a high stool. And, you get one from the bar. So he went to the bar, gave the guy $10, and I had my high stool. And that was the very first time that I sat there and crossed my legs, and did my thing. And that was a good memory for me because I said, well, how does she do that? Just talking. Just talking.
It changed the format of
It
the
changed the
commentator
whole,
on
and
stage.
then finally we got the director's chairs. Another fond memory was meeting so many important people, who came, and they were just so nice. They were just normal, ordinary people, just like you and I. Had what?
Nancy Reagan.
Oh, you are so funny. That's a good one. So Nancy Reagan and I had on the same dress at the same affair. New York City. It was really funny. Governor Rockefeller is the governor. Rockefeller Center has the Rainbow Room and the Rainbow Grill. That's high up, 66 floors up. And the Governor Rockefeller, was having a big to-do for the governors of all of the United States coming in from all their states. And at that time, Reagan was the governor of California.
Yes.
And so I'm in, I don't think there's a picture of me, but I have on a Halston gown in Jersey, the color of my complexion. And it was just a skirt and just two straps go up like this. And you couldn't wear a bra or anything. That was back in the day. Not today. And I'm in this gown, and I see Nancy Reagan. She has on the same Halston in red. She looked at me, and I went right over there and introduced myself to her. But no, I don't have a picture of that. But that was a funny moment. She and I had on the same Halston. Hers, well, she loved red, And Halston made mine. Can you imagine? That's how I got to know about good clothes. Made to measure. They're one of a kind because of the, no, that's a Halston, but that's not the one. That's a beauty too, that guy. I loved Halston. And I loved a lot of, I wore a lot of Scott Barry also. But when you have a dress made to measure,
Or suit, yeah.
I didn't have that before the Ebony Fashion Fair. Made to measure on my body, wow. 2 outfits every year. I still have some of them. I'm going to give them away. I'm giving some things away already.
Yes, you talked about that. Would you share your
With
ideas around that?
FIT did a big exhibit. In fact, it's still on until the 6th of May. FIT is Fashion Institute of Technology in New York. And they did an exhibit of just black designers, and they came to my home, and they selected 9 outfits from my collection of black designers, and it's on display, so I gave a gift to the Fashion Institute of Technology. I wish you could see that exhibit. It's exquisite. They have 75 looks by, I think, about 35 designers, even old and hip-hop, all the way through, all the way through. It's fabulous, a really great exhibit. Scott Barry, one of my favorite young designers, Mimi Planche. She does trampunto stitching. I mean, she's incredible. A lot of wonderful young designers out there now.
And I just wanted to share with everyone, Audrey Smaltz is celebrating her 80th birthday this year.
Yeah, long time, huh? Long life, long fun. Been a fabulous life. Couldn't be better. You look so familiar in that fabulous hat. I'm loving it. Oh, okay, Mom. Fabulous. Love. You know, you miss that look now. I mean, if I see one pair of tights, one more, yeah, but you're not showing everything. That's all people wear now. Have you noticed? Yeah. These young people, they all have on, there's other things to wear other than tights, no? You want to ask a question?
Yeah, so we have cards
Don't
here.
you agree? Oh, yeah, not everybody's a size 4. And then they wear the real short jacket.
Here's a question. What impact do you see that Ebony Fashion Fair has had on today's fashions?
Well, it depends on the age group. We know more about style because there's fashion and then there's style. So you need to have a style, and Ebony showed you that style if you could pick it up, because you have to know your own style. Mm-hmm. Fashion is what's now. And I always say just because it's in doesn't necessarily mean that you ought to be in it. Like those tights. Those tights are in. But Ebony, when we were around and you could see, you emulated some of these, the color, you know, the fabric. You learned about fabrics, you know, textiles. So I know we did influence.
What is a fond memory from Detroit?
Oh, Detroit, we did the show. Oh, we stayed at the Pontchartrain Hotel.
Pontchartrain.
How many people know the Pontchartrain Hotel?
Yes.
And there's this huge street, and then there's the Ford Auditorium. So we worked the Ford Auditorium.
Yes.
So we went out the back door, ran across this huge street.
Yes.
Wow. To the Ford Auditorium. We did 2 shows, and the woman, Miss Inez King, was the general chair. Yes. Oh, our general chairs were knocking, you know. She was the general chair, and Miss Inez King was always so gracious, so elegant. And we had 2 shows there, and one show we had a young man who, he just had to get up on stage and walk across the stage. Oh, yes, he did. That was a fond memory. I didn't say anything. I didn't do it a commentary. And it was always for a church. It was for her church. She raised money for the church. And she had 2 shows and over 3,000 people each show.
Yes, yes.
They could really raise some money. And the tickets were not a lot of money.
No.
The average ticket was $8. $8. Now they raised the money.
Yeah.
$8.
Yeah. So you're
And-
talking here in Washington, sold out every year at Kennedy Center. So you're talking 5,400 people.
And it was only 8. And
Don't-
the students were cheaper. And then they would have a small group of people who would pay more, so they could come to the cocktail party. But the tickets were $8. When I look at some of what I was spending, to take a taxi was $2. To have lunch or dinner was $7. So
Yeah.
that was back in the day, as they say.
As a fashion and marketing professor, what's your advice on never forgetting the bridge that carried us across?
Say that again? As a fashion?
As a fashion and marketing professor,
Oh.
what's your advice on never forgetting the bridge that carried us across?
Well, we don't talk about our black designers enough and what they have done. And I think we need to promote that more. We've always been dressmakers, and whatever. But our black designers have never gotten their due. And I think how many of you know a lady named Ann Lowe? Ann Lowe made the gown for Jacqueline Onassis, because she lost about $2,000 because there was a flood. And she had to remake the gown in a couple of, right, Valerie? She had to remake the gown. And we don't know our history. So the gap is that we need to find one great designer who we think can really make it and put some money behind them. Because you can be a talent, but if you don't have the business and the money, it's not gonna work. So you need it's money and talent. Because Anne Klein, had her husband to help her. And I always tell young people, well, Calvin Klein, but do you know his partner? Barry Schwartz. If it wasn't for Barry, there would be no Calvin. And if it wasn't for Pierre Biege, there wouldn't be no YSL, Yves Saint Laurent. You have to have a business partner, and some of the designers don't realize that. I don't know whether I answered that question.
That's fine. You shared one of Mrs. Johnson's fashion mantras was, you should look good coming and going. Do you know what inspired Mrs. Johnson?
Well, Mrs. Johnson was an interior designer.
Yes.
And ladies of that era, they could sew. There was something that was a part of growing up. With a sewing machine, you had to use it. So she could sew. She was an interior designer. She loved fashion. And so it was always in her. You should see a picture of her at her wedding. I don't think she made the wedding gown, but she's always been a part of this. I mean, the way she lived. Oh my God, if you could see the way she lived. Wow. She had, because of her, I got to meet Picasso. She wanted a Picasso. A De Chirico. She wanted a De Chirico. So she had it in her. It's in you. It was there all along. From Selma, Alabama.
When did Pat Cleveland join, and what was her role?
Pat joined the Ebony Fashion Fair in 1966, and she was either 15 or 16 years old. And Eunice discovered Pat Cleveland on the street, and I don't think they were in Harlem. Eunice was in New York at the time, and she saw Pat. Pat had made this little dress she had on, and Eunice talked to her, and then Eunice got to meet Pat's mother, Lady Bird, and Lady Bird was hired as wardrobe, so that because she had to have a chaperone, the girls had to be at least 18. So that's how she got on and she became the top model. If you've never seen anybody hit the runway, I'm sorry you didn't see Miss Pat Cleveland. And now she has a daughter who's just as cute as she could be, Anna Cleveland, who twirls. She could just twirl like this, yes. She was incredible. We're going to see her soon at our reunion.
What do you think about the discussion around the color nude now?
The color nude or
Nude. The color nude.
nude? I understand nude, the color nude, but it's not nude. Because there's a difference. There's the color nude, and then there's nude. So what would you talk? Who wants the color? I like the color nude, but not nude, not the see-through.
No,
Oh, there's a difference. So what do you mean, the color or see-through? Oh, now you're talking about nude, meaning white's nude as opposed to black's nude. Got it. So nude had to take on new shades. So we were beige, brown, natural, and then you had the dark brown, ebony, very, very dark. That became nude, and that's very interesting that you asked that, because I have a gown that Yves Saint Laurent made for me. And when I saw the gown, the underslip was pale beige, because it was on a white girl. And when I tried on the dress, I said, oh, I can't have that. And the vendeuse had Mr. Saint Laurent come downstairs to where I was, and he made a brown slip for me, dark brown, so that when I wear that dress, you can't see. That's my nude, a dark brown. Excellent question. Thank you.
I'm a former ground crew member.
Well, somebody is it?
Yes.
Go on, ground crew.
Do you still run the business? Do you still run the business? And she says, thank you for the awesome opportunity.
Oh, you're more than welcome. I can't wait to talk to you afterward. Great. How nice. Yes, I still have the business. The ground crew is still around. 40 years on 7/11, 2017. I started my business on the 7th day of the 11th month in the 77th year. So this is going to be 40 years. And I'm working with a young girl who wants to take it over. So let's hope that works out. Yeah, one of the young ladies who worked for the ground crew many years ago. Well, she has to give it a whole new twist, because the fashion scene is totally different. Oh, totally different.
I'm going to do a couple more questions. Best designer, worst designer to work with?
Oh, the best designer is the one who pays me on time. When I get that check, that is the best designer. No such thing as the worst designer. Now, unless you don't pay me. But even then, I just talked to a few people about those who didn't pay me. But your best designer, whoever pays you, girl.
Yes, that's right. And the others are comments, but this will be the last question. Of all the fashions, do you have a favorite?
What do you mean by of all the fashions, do I have a favorite?
In terms of all of these clothes that you've modelled, all these shows that you've done, was there something that really struck you to this day of all the fashions that you...
Yes, and you have it right here at this museum. My favorite piece of all the fashions in my era, 70 to 77, is Hubert de Givenchy. It's a mauve lavender dress with fringe, a fringe shawl, fringe at the bottom, fitted, and it would spin around. It is so divine. And I'll never forget, Hubert de Givenchy called the office in New York, and he was going to be at the Metropolitan Museum of Art in New York City. And he wanted to borrow the dress. I had to call Mrs. Johnson. Mrs. Johnson, we got to get that dress. Oh, we got the dress so he could take it, put it on a model. And so he wanted that. He loved that dress. That was my favorite dress. And it's here, it's right upstairs. And the other part of that, Halston could do no wrong. Simple, Keep it simple, sweetheart. Kiss. When it's simple, it's for me. You see how simple this is? I had this gorgeous white leather jacket, but it's too hot. And I'm a hot mama. So I just left the jacket here. But I put on the red shoes. I tell everybody, you gonna wear black? You gotta have on some red shoes. Don't put on black shoes. Remember that. Stephen Burrows. You know Stephen Burrows? SB stands for Stephen Burrows, Soul Brother, SB. And he always had red shoes with everything.
I'm going to not use my mic for the last comment. Thank you for your interview for the Washington Star Fashion. And here's a copy of the article here with Audrey's picture. And in my research, I have a background in library and information science. I was looking for articles from this time period. Of course, the Chicago Defender did great coverage of the fashion show, and Washington comes up second in its coverage in the black press. And so thank you for bringing this article in.
Oh, good. Nina Hyde is a good friend. She wrote for the Washington Post. But thank you for having me. It has really been my pleasure. God bless all of you.